Hi everybody, I'm Stefan for adobe.com, and today I'm very excited about this tutorial because we are gonna be creating a convincing candle smoke using Trapcode Particular version 2. So first of all, let's take a look how the final result will look like. As you can see, we have a picture of a candle and the smoke rising up. So let's start the tutorial. First of all, create new composition, of course. Use 720p preset, hit OK and create a new solid, and let's call it particles, and apply Trapcode Particular, and let's start tweaking the settings. First of all, open the emitter section and let's increase the number of particles to 500, and let's change the direction from uniform to directional, and direction spread, let's increase that to 30, and let's push the emitter back in space around 4000 maybe, and move it right here like so. Okay, velocity random, let's raise this to 50 because we want the particles to be more random. And the other setting, velocity distribution, set this to 0, and I think that's it for the emitter section. Let's move on to the particle and let's see what we've got here. We have particle swipe, which by default is set to 3 seconds, but we are going to change that to 0.8 maybe, or something lower than 3 seconds. And wipe random, let's set this to 25% and increase the sphere feather to 100, and also increase the size to 120, and change the opacity overwipe and size overwipe settings to this preset, so we have a smooth fade out of the particles when they rise up. Let's set the opacity to 5, and let's change the color of the particles. Let's change the set color type overwipe, and color overwipe, let's use this gradient, and change the black color to something whiter, something like that maybe, and that's it, the color of our particles. And let's move on to the next section. I think we are done with the settings here in the particle tab. Collapse this and let's open the physics section. Here we are going to create the movement of the particles. So first of all, set the gravity to -200, so our particles rise up a bit. And let's open the air tab and let's see, change the spin amplitude to 50, change the spin frequency to 5 because we want our particles to spin, and let's set the fade in spin time to 35 seconds, and here using the wind settings we are going to affect the particles to move upwards. So let's set the wind Y to negative 700 maybe, and so far we have something like that, which reminds flame. And you can use this as a flame if you cover it and play with the settings. It may look convincing if you tweak the settings, but for the sake of this tutorial I'm not going to show you how to do that, and focus on the main thing, which is to create the convincing smoke. And let's move on to the turbulence field, and let's change some settings. Let's change the effect position to 100, so we have a bit of randomness. As you can see here, our particles move like so. And let's change the fade-in time seconds to 1 second, which means that the particles that are emitted after 1 second from the moment that they were emitted, the effect position will affect the particles. As you can see, if we change this to 5 seconds, we don't see any effect to our particles, because our particle life is shorter than the fade-in time. If we raise the particle life to 7, you can see that our particles start being affected from the turbulence field right here, which is the 5 seconds after the moment that they were emitted. So let's set this to 0.8, and let's set this to 1, and for the rest of the settings I think this will work pretty good. Let's move on to the next step, which is the aux system or auxiliary system. Let's open this and see what we have here. First of all, let's turn on the emitter to continuously, and immediately you can see some particles are emitted from the main particles. So set the emit probability to 25% and set the particles per second to 1500, and we get some pretty interesting results, but not what we are looking for. So keep on changing the settings. Let's set the life of the particles to 4 seconds, and let's use a sphere type for the particles, and set the velocity to 30 maybe, and set the size to 25, and let's change the again size overlife and opacity overlife settings to ramp down preset, because we want a smooth fade out of the particles as they go upwards. And set the opacity to 3, and also color from main to 100, because we want the auxiliary particles to be the same color as our main particles. And as you can see, it takes a bit of render time already because we have tons of particles here. So I'm going to change the resolution from full to half to work faster, and that's the result so far. But we will tweak the settings, don't worry. Let's change the particles feather to 100 because we want very soft particles, and control from main particles. Let's see what we can change here. And basically these settings are inherited from the main particles, which means that if I change the inherited velocity here, it will take the velocity from the main particles and apply it to these child particles. So let's set this to 1000 and see how it looks. It takes a bit to render, and as you can see we have some pretty wild results. And let's change the stop emit to 65 maybe, and as you can see our particles stop emitting right here at this point. And let's move on to the physics settings, and as you can see we can change some settings here. First thing is air resistance. Let's set this to 25 because the smoke is very white and we can see some air resistance, and it's better to have air resistance. It helps to sell the effect and the illusion that this is real smoke. Wind effect, let's set this to 100, and what this does is takes the wind from here, which is negative 700, and applies it 100% to the auxiliary particles, which means that they will move the same way like the main particles. So let's set this to 100, and as you can see we get some pretty interesting results so far, but not quite what we are looking for. So let's change the turbulence position, and this is the same. It will affect the auxiliary particles based on the effect position right here in the turbulence field. So let's change this to 1000 maybe to see how it will look, and maybe 1200, something like that. And let's open the randomness and set the randomness for the size to 100 and for the opacity again to 100. And as you can see it starts to look like smoke. And let's see something else. Everything looks good for me. And let's see if we turn on the motion blur for the composition, how it will look like. It takes a bit to render, and I think it looks better with motion blur. So let's keep that like so. Visibility, we are not going to change anything here or here at the rendering. Let's see, motion blur, comp settings, okay. So everything looks fine here. Let's collapse this and this and this and this, and let's create a run preview to see how it looks. I'm going to pause the video and get back when the preview is ready, and let's see how it looks at the moment. And as you can see, it's kind of what I created first, but not the same, and I think that the problem is coming from the main particles, and I think that's because the velocity is set to 100. Let's set this to 0 and see how it will look like. And yes, I forgot to change the velocity to 0. And by the way, I think that we don't need the main particles at all. So because we are getting something like very soft flame, which is gray, and I think we don't need that. So let's set the opacity to 0 and see how it will look. And I think that this is much better than my original try here, as you can see, because we don't need this. Of course, you can set the opacity to 5 or so and change the color to, let's see, change the color to orange and red to get a flamey look result, and set the auxiliary particles with their own color, for example like so, or you can just come here, copy and paste. And now let's change this to something like that. Maybe like so, and whiter core here, and see how it will look. But I think we don't need the main particles. And yep, the result is this, because we have a core from main particles to 100. Let's set this to 0 and fix the problem. And you can color the particles the way you want. In this case, I'm going to turn off the main particles, and let's focus on creating the scene with the candle. So you can take the picture or the shot, you can pre-render this and track it to the shot and blend it. But in this case, I'm going to scale down this picture and move it here, and take the layer with the particles, move it right here, change the blending mode to screen, and set the opacity to 40% maybe, to see how it will blend with the scene. Because as you know, the smoke is transparent, maybe not as much, but something like that, or even more, like so. And let's try to lower the opacity of the auxiliary particles here and set the opacity to 1.5 and see how it will affect the overall look. And I think that's much better. You can turn this back to 100 and set this to true maybe. And basically it's all about tweaking the settings. It's very easy to create something like that. You just need to define the movement of the particles using the wind and the turbulence field, and that's it. I used the default settings here in the turbulence field for the scale complexity and the all multipliers and stuff, evolution speed, offset and so on. And if you change these settings, you will get a different results, and you can play with the settings and tweak them to create even more convincing results. As you can see, you can change this to 15, for example, to see what you can get with these settings, and try different settings, maybe increase the complexity and lower the scale, and see how it will look. And not that bad, I think. So that's it. I think this tutorial was interesting and useful, and you learned a new techniques to work with particular, and hope that I inspired you to create some amazing smoke effects using Trapcode Particular. Once again, I'm Stefan for aetuts.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on next time.